He recorded and made some of the most amazing. He would go to and have a bad experience at Taco Bell and write a song about it.
Vinnie Paul, the thunderous drummer of Pantera, was more than just a musician. He was the heartbeat of one of the most powerful forces in metal. With his fierce double bass drumming, unrelenting energy, and unmatched precision, Vinnie became an icon whose influence echoed across generations of metalheads. He was the drummer who not only played the rhythm, but who embodied the very essence of rock and roll rebellion, resilience, and loyalty to the music that shaped his life. However, behind the pounding drums and the massive stage presence, there was a man haunted by grief, personal battles, and the tragic loss of his brother, Dimebag Darrell. His life would forever be marked by triumphs, breakdowns, and an unhealable scar left by an unforgivable act of violence. Early life, a Southern legacy of music and discipline. Vinnie Paul was born on March 11, 1964, in Arlington, Texas, into a family steeped in musical tradition. His father, Jerry Abbott, was a country musician, sound engineer, and producer who had a significant influence on his sons' lives. Jerry didn't just give them a foundation in music. He built a studio in their home, where young Vinnie and his brother, Darrell Lance Abbott, later known as Dimebag Darrell, began to explore their musical talents. The Abbott family home was a hub of creativity, filled with the sounds of guitars, pianos, and the constant hum of musical experimentation. Though initially encouraged to pursue brass instruments, Vinnie quickly found his calling behind the drums. His natural instincts led him to the rhythmic power of percussion, a decision that would define his entire career. Vinnie was drawn to the primal energy of the drums, the way they could command attention and stir the crowd into a frenzy. From a young age, he exhibited a rebellious streak, a hunger for loud, fast, and intense music that matched his uncontainable energy. Unlike his brother, Darrell, who was meticulously honing his guitar technique, Vinnie was less concerned with formal lessons and more focused on the raw intensity of the sound. Vinnie was largely self-taught, developing his unique style through relentless practice and a love for rock drummers like Peter Criss of Kiss, Alex Van Halen, and Tommy Aldridge. His drumming wasn't just about technique, it was about feeling the rhythm in his bones, allowing the music to speak through him. This connection to the drums was visceral and instinctive, and it set Vinnie apart from other drummers who were focused on perfecting the technical aspects of their instrument. Vinnie's style was built on power, aggression, and precision, qualities that would define his career in Pantera. The birth of Pantera, a legacy in the making. In 1981, Vinnie and Darrell officially formed Pantera, a band that would eventually change the landscape of heavy metal. Initially, the band was caught up in the glam metal scene, like many of their peers. They wore the flashy clothes, sported big hair, and played in local bars, covering songs by bands like Van Halen. But despite their early success in the glam metal world, Vinnie and Darrell were dissatisfied with the direction the music was going. They felt it lacked the aggression and rawness they craved. As the years passed, Pantera evolved. In 1987, they made a pivotal change by replacing their original lead singer, Terrence Lee, with Phil Anselmo. Phil's energy, wild spirit, and powerful vocals brought a new intensity to the band that pushed them toward a heavier, darker sound. This marked the end of their glam metal phase and the beginning of something much more aggressive. Vinnie was ready for this change. He had always believed that the band needed a heavier, more intense sound to reflect their true identity. The transformation was complete with the release of Cowboys from Hell in 1990. Vinnie's drumming on this album was explosive, each fill and breakdown a punch to the face. His playing was aggressive, tight, and precise, driving the band's signature groove metal sound forward. The album's success cemented Pantera's place in the metal world, and Vinnie's drumming became the foundation on which the band's identity was built. But this was just the beginning. Vulgar Display of Power, 1992, saw Pantera's evolution into one of the most influential metal bands of all time. With tracks like Walk and Mouth for War, Vinnie's drumming was not just a backdrop to the music. It was the engine that drove the entire band forward. His playing was a relentless force, punishing the listener with its sheer power and precision. Vinnie's double bass technique became one of the defining features of Pantera's sound, setting the band apart from their peers and earning Vinnie a place among the greatest drummers in metal history. By 1994, Pantera was at the peak of their power with Far Beyond Driven, an album that debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200. For a band with no radio hits and no mainstream compromise, this was a monumental achievement. Vinnie had not only solidified his place in the metal world, but had become the backbone of a movement. His drumming was a declaration of rebellion against the mainstream music industry. The struggles within, tension, addiction, and the fall of Pantera. However, the rise of Pantera was not without its struggles. While the band's music became more intense, so did the tensions within the group. As the band gained more success, the personalities within Pantera began to clash. Phil Anselmo, in particular, became increasingly unreliable, battling addiction and spiraling into personal turmoil. Vinnie, always the disciplined one, found himself growing frustrated with the lack of commitment from his bandmates. For Vinnie, Pantera wasn't just a band, it was a family, and the growing instability of the group felt like a betrayal of that bond. By the time they recorded The Great Southern Trendkill, 1996, and Reinventing the Steel, 2000, the band's internal conflicts had become impossible to ignore. Phil's absences during recording sessions and his growing distance from the rest of the band created an atmosphere of tension and mistrust. Vinnie, who had always been the operational brain of Pantera, found himself at odds with the other members. His perfectionism clashed with Phil's erratic behavior, and the magic that had once defined their bond began to unravel. In 2003, after years of internal strife, Pantera officially disbanded. The breakup was sudden and bitter, leaving the band's legacy in ruins. There were no apologies, no reconciliation, just silence. For Vinnie, this wasn't just the end of a band, it was the collapse of his entire world. Pantera had been his life. It was the culmination of everything he had worked for, everything he had built with his brother. But now, it was gone. Tragedy strikes. The loss of Dimebag Darrell. The years following Pantera's breakup were marked by deep personal pain for Vinnie. The loss of his brother, Darrell, would haunt him for the rest of his life. In 2003, Vinnie and Darrell had attempted to start fresh with a new band, Damageplan. The goal was not to recreate Pantera, but to forge something new, something they could control without the baggage of past conflicts. They recorded newfound power and began touring, but the energy was different. The raw excitement that had defined Pantera's early days was gone, replaced by a subtle emptiness that Vinnie couldn't shake. On December 8, 2004, that emptiness was shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. While Damageplan was performing at the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, an armed man named Nathan Gale stormed the stage and shot Dimebag Darrell dead in front of Vinnie's eyes. Gale, a former Marine suffering from delusional paranoia, believed that Darrell had stolen his music and had come to exact revenge. The shooter fired 15 shots, killing 4 people, including Darrell, before he was shot and killed by a police officer. The moment was a nightmare come to life for Vinnie Paul. His brother, his best friend, his musical soulmate, was taken from him in an instant. The shock and horror of that night left an indelible mark on Vinnie, and he would never recover from the loss. The tragedy shattered his world, and the pain of losing Darrell would linger with him for the rest of his life. The tragic loss of Dimebag. Darrell Vinnie Paul's life was irrevocably changed on December 8, 2004. The night his brother, Darrell Dimebag Abbott, was tragically murdered on stage during a Damageplan concert. The loss was not only devastating on a personal level, but it also shook the very foundation of the heavy metal world. Dimebag, one of the most iconic and influential guitarists in metal history, was shot dead in front of hundreds of fans by a deranged gunman. The scene was brutal, chaotic, and horrifying, as Vinnie, who had spent his entire career playing alongside Dimebag, was forced to witness his brother's violent death in real time. The tragedy forever altered Vinnie, not just as a musician, but as a human being. For Vinnie Paul, the grief was profound and unimaginable. Dimebag wasn't just his brother, he was his musical soulmate, his creative partner, the one who had been by his side since childhood. Their bond was built not only on family, but on a shared love of music that had taken them to the heights of success. Together, Pantera had created some of the most ferocious and innovative music in metal history. But with Dimebag's death, Vinnie felt as though his very soul had been ripped from his body. His identity, his reason for existence, was intertwined with his brother's. And when Dimebag was gone, Vinnie was left to navigate a world that suddenly felt cold and empty. The aftermath: isolation and reclusion. Following the tragedy, Vinnie's life spiraled into a period of deep personal anguish. He withdrew from the public eye, opting for seclusion in the aftermath of the loss. For nearly 3 years, he cut himself off from the world he once knew. No longer the exuberant, life-of-the-party figure that fans and fellow musicians had adored. Instead, he retreated into a quiet, reclusive existence, surrounded only by a small circle of friends and loved ones, including his girlfriend, Chelsea Yeager, and the solace of alcohol. Vinnie, a man known for his larger-than-life persona, became someone who sought refuge in the quiet of his own home, refusing interviews and turning down offers to collaborate with other artists. He was broken, and it was clear that the pain of losing his brother was a wound that could never truly heal. To the outside world, it seemed as though Vinnie Paul had vanished into the ether. He avoided the spotlight, clinging to the memories of his brother and the life they had built together. He was no longer the confident, energetic drummer of Pantera, the powerhouse behind some of the most iconic songs in metal. Instead, he was a man struggling to process his grief and find a sense of purpose in a world without his brother by his side. The return to drums, Hellyeah, and a new beginning. It wasn't until 2006 that Vinnie would finally return to the music scene, though not with the band that made him a household name. Instead, he was invited to join Hellyeah, a supergroup formed by members of Mudvayne and Nothingface. Initially, Vinnie was adamant in his refusal to re-enter the music world. "I have nothing left to play," he famously said. But after much persuasion, he agreed to give it a try, albeit reluctantly. The idea of playing drums again seemed almost impossible for him, and the thought of sharing the stage with strangers was too painful. However, the experience proved to be unexpectedly cathartic. The first jam session with Hellyeah didn't bring him the closure he had hoped for, but it did offer a spark of something he hadn't felt in years: freedom. For the first time since that horrific night in Columbus, Vinnie found himself behind the drums again, feeling the beat reverberate through his chest, the powerful thrum of bass and guitar vibrating in his bones. It wasn't Pantera, and it never could be. but it was a place of rebirth. Vinnie wasn't playing for the masses or for any grand artistic ambition. He was playing for himself, for his brother, and for the feeling that he was alive again. That first jam session was a moment of raw emotion, a reminder of why he had started playing in the first place. The uncontainable urge to express something deeper than words could convey. Hellyeah, a new chapter in Vinnie's life. In 2007, Hellyeah released their self-titled debut album, and Vinnie officially returned to the metal world, not as a revered icon, but as a survivor. The band's sound was a departure from the groove-heavy, aggressive force of Pantera, but it had its own intensity, driven by Vinnie's thunderous drumming. The album, while not as commercially successful as Pantera's records, marked the beginning of a new chapter for Vinnie, a chance to reclaim some semblance of normalcy in his life. Over the following years, he would tour with Hellyeah, release more albums, and begin to find solace in the music once more. However, despite the success of the band, those close to Vinnie could sense that he was never fully able to recover from the loss of his brother. He carried Dimebag's ashes with him in a pendant, and there was always an empty chair next to his drum kit, where Dimebag once stood. Every performance, every tour, and every album was a reminder that no matter how much time passed, Vinnie's heart would never be whole again. Music, he once said, was the only thing that kept him going. Without it, he wasn't sure he would still be alive. So, he kept playing, he kept performing, and he kept drinking. The party animal persona, on stage and off. Vinnie Paul was known for his high-energy performances and his reputation as the ultimate party host. On stage, he was a force of nature, his hair flying around him, a wild smile on his face, and his drumming so powerful that it felt like the very air around him was shaking. Offstage, he was the soul of every party, the man who made sure everyone had a good time. He was famous for his wild all-night gatherings where the drinks flowed freely and the music never stopped. It was during these parties that Vinnie truly came alive, surrounded by friends, fans, and fellow musicians. The iconic black-tooth grin, a cocktail made with Crown Royal and Coke, was his drink of choice, strong, dark, and sweet, much like the music that defined his life. It became a symbol of the bond between him and his late brother, Dimebag. Every time Vinnie raised his glass, it was a tribute to their unbreakable bond and the life they had built together in the chaotic world of rock and roll. However, despite his larger-than-life persona, Vinnie was also intensely private about his personal life. He never married, never had children. Not because he didn't want to, but because music and his relationship with Dimebag were deep enough to leave little room for anything else. His long-term relationship with Chelsea Yeager, a model who was nearly 2 decades his junior, was the only constant in his personal life. She stood by his side through the tumultuous years, both in the spotlight and behind the scenes, providing a quiet comfort in the wake of his brother's death. Vinnie once said he didn't like being alone, but that he didn't need a crowd either. What he truly needed was music, whiskey, and the memories of his brother. These 3 things, he believed, could either destroy him or save him. In his case, they were his lifeline. The loneliness beneath the partying. Despite the endless parties, the roar of the crowds, and the noise that defined his career, those closest to Vinnie Paul understood that beneath the surface there was an aching loneliness that no amount of alcohol or music could erase. While he thrived in the chaos of after-parties and was the life of the metal community, at the end of the night, he often retreated into solitude. In his hotel rooms, away from the cheers and the clinking of glasses, he would find himself listening to old Pantera tapes, The familiar riffs now tinged with sorrow, or simply staring at the empty chair beside his drum kit where Dimebag once stood. It was a constant reminder that the brother he had once shared every moment with, both on stage and off, was gone. The pain of that loss, the horror of witnessing his brother's life cut short in front of him, lingered in Vinnie's soul every single day. That tragedy didn't just take Dimebag from him. It took away the man he had been before that night in Columbus, the man who had stood side by side with his brother, creating timeless music and living out the dream they had worked so hard to build together. Though he tried to bury the grief under laughter, music, and alcohol, the void in his heart never truly went away. It was a wound too deep to heal, and no matter how many songs he played or crowds he rocked, Vinnie would never fully escape the shadow of that night. The final years, a man out of time. As Vinnie entered his 50s, it became clear that the years of living life on the edge, coupled with the emotional toll of his brother's death, had taken a significant toll on his health. Though he continued to perform with Hellyeah and kept the same high-energy lifestyle he had in his younger years, there was a palpable change in him. The endless touring, the late nights, the alcohol, all of it was starting to catch up with him. His once vibrant eyes, full of life and energy, began to show signs of wear. He still smiled, still played, still partied, but there was a sadness behind his eyes that could not be ignored. Even in the midst of the crowd, he often kept a distance, a subtle barrier between him and the world. Despite his physical decline, Vinnie never stopped playing. He never stopped living the rock and roll life. The pain of losing Dimebag was something he carried with him every day, but he refused to let it defeat him. Music was his way of surviving, of keeping his brother's spirit alive, of holding on to the legacy they had built together. He continued to perform as if there was no tomorrow, as if each show might be his last. And in many ways, it was his way of fighting back against the darkness, of refusing to let the weight of the world crush him. The final goodbye. Vinnie Paul's passing on June 22, 2018. Vinnie Paul passed away in his sleep at the age of 54. The cause was determined to be dilated cardiomyopathy, a condition that weakened his heart and led to severe coronary artery disease. It was a quiet death, in stark contrast to the loud, chaotic life he had lived. Vinnie Paul had always been the life of the party, the heart of every rock and roll celebration, but when the time came for him to leave this world, he did so quietly, without fanfare, without the roar of a drum solo or the cheers of a crowd. He was laid to rest beside his brother, Dimebag, at the Moore Memorial Gardens Cemetery in Arlington, Texas. There, the two brothers were reunited, side by side, their graves etched with the names of the warriors who had together forged a legacy that would never be forgotten. Fans from around the world gathered to pay their respects, leaving tributes of candles, Pantera shirts, drumsticks, and black-tooth grin tattoos at the cemetery. The global metal community, which had always revered Vinnie Paul, was left in mourning. But even in death, Vinnie's impact on the world of heavy metal was undeniable. Legacy and impact. The enduring influence of Vinnie Paul. Vinnie Paul may not have been the fastest drummer, nor the most technically complex, but he was one of the most influential. His drumming style was heavy, precise, and full of power. Alongside his brother, Dimebag, he helped create the genre of groove metal, a fusion of thrash and southern rock that defined Pantera's sound. He wasn't just the drummer, he was the backbone of the band, the force that held it all together. His drumming was the heartbeat of the music, and his style influenced countless drummers who followed in his footsteps. Even in his final years, Vinnie remained a symbol of the unbreakable spirit of rock and roll. He never chased trends, never compromised his music for commercial gain, and never allowed his legacy to be overshadowed by fame or fortune. He was true to himself, true to his music, and true to his brother. And in the end, that was what mattered most. In the end, Vinnie Paul didn't need radio hits, million-dollar studios, or spotlight attention to prove his worth. He was a true artist, a true warrior, and a true legend of rock and metal. His drum beats will echo forever, a reminder of the man who never gave up, never surrendered, and always kept drumming, even when the world around him was falling apart.